Amy, I'm so happy you're here with us.
Thanks for the invitation.
So let's scare everyone, shall we? Recent polls say Americans are more afraid of malicious cyber activity than economic problems, nuclear weapons, and terrorism. Should we be afraid?
Short answer, yes.
Okay, good.
But I don't see those things as mutually exclusive.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is cyber involves all of those things. So all of those threats, all of those traditional threats that we have seen over time, terrorism, espionage, intellectual property theft, crime, now takes on a whole new path in the sense of cyber capabilities, and just the exponential increase in technology that we've seen has enabled those things to be really a lot scarier.
Yeah. So before I ask you about the specifics, tell me a little bit about your role and what it encompasses.
Sure. So I am, for the FBI, we break ourselves down into separate divisions, but one of the divisions I oversee is specifically focused on criminal investigations. So everything from public corruption and white-collar election fraud, all of those things, violent crime, as well as financial crime. Another division I oversee is our cyber division, and those are the folks who are really looking at the intrusions, what's out there as far as what the botnets or e-skimming or business email compromise and how it manifests itself. And I'm also responsible for all of our global operations across the planet.
So you've got plenty of free time, is what you're telling me.
Pretty much.
Okay, cool. Yeah. You know, one bugaboo at this conference has been China. We heard about it quite a bit during yesterday's town hall. People are very concerned about it, obviously, in terms of global competitiveness for the United States. Tell me what you're seeing is actually coming out of China, what we should be worried about.
China is, to us, clearly, their goal is to become the world's dominant superpower. And to do that, they're willing to steal information, clearly, steal intellectual property, to steal PII, also to steal military secrets, government secrets, academic secrets, R&D. And in the process of doing all of those things, they also are investing in companies in the US. They are part of the supply chain. And all of those things creates, for us, a risk that we see where they can get information that American companies and American ingenuity has developed and has taken years. They get it for free, they get it quickly, and it positions them to achieve their goal.
So what role do you play in pushing back against that?
So for one thing, the FBI, of course, coordinates with a whole bunch of other agencies. And that would include the Department of Homeland Security in looking at how we defend our networks, but also we work with the Department of Defense on how we may be able to see what's happening outside of the United States and how we might be able to take offensive actions potentially. But the FBI's main role is really accountability, trying to figure out the attribution. Who's responsible for this thing and how do we hold them accountable? So that whether that's through indictments or criminal charges or whether it's through sanctions, that's our role to try to make that happen. Figure out who did it, investigate, obviously Federal Bureau of Investigation, figure out who did it, and then hold them accountable. Yeah.
Let's flip to our other favorite bugaboo, Russia. So what are you seeing there? I mean, is it any different than China?
It is. It's different. Clearly, they're still interested in stealing our military secrets, our government secrets, R&D. But what you've seen publicly, of course, over the past several years is this what we call malign foreign influence. So influence campaigns, being able to use and take advantage of our social media, our dependence, really, I call it, on social media. And it really, I hope, makes people question whether or not what they're seeing, what they're reading, what they're hearing is real, because we've seen instance after instance where they are using those platforms to try to divide us as a nation.
Let's talk about a specific instance that happened fairly recently. Well, not fairly recently, but it hit the headlines fairly recently, which is the Florida voter registration incident. So tell me a little bit about what happened there.
Yeah, so of course, as you saw, the Department of Justice charged several individuals, Russian nationals, who worked for the main intelligence director at the GRU back a while ago with intrusions, with basically stealing information. And what we did at that time when we saw that in a run-up to the presidential election in 2016 is we realized we've got to bring all of the resources that we have in the FBI together to identify that type of activity when that's happening. And other agencies needed to do the same thing. And so what we did is formed in the FBI a foreign influence task force. So that's comprised of, like I was talking about earlier, our cyber division, our criminal investigative division, our counterintelligence division, even our counterterrorism division, and looking at that problem. So we never stopped after those charges to identify where we see that activity happening. We did that into the midterm elections in 2018, and we're continuing to look for that type of activity into the 2020 campaign and the election. And so when we see, and we saw scanning activity, and we saw attempts to try to infiltrate these election networks that were being used, we never saw, at least we have no evidence that there was any indication of where votes were changed or there was anything like that, but there were certainly instances where trying to gain access to information that surrounds the electoral process should be concerning to us.
Yes, I would say so. You know, the FBI received a lot of criticism for that incident, and it was really around transparency, which is kind of part and parcel with cybersecurity. So the criticism was that the FBI wasn't transparent enough, it wasn't sharing enough information with, as you can imagine, a whole host of folks who are involved in the voter process. How do you feel about that? Because transparency is both an asset and a risk in this line of work.
Yeah. It gets us into a really good discussion, I think, as to when companies see something, activity that looks off, that they know, is maybe not something, but maybe is, we are highly encouraging them to contact us. And then the problem is that, first off, of course, we recognize the competitive advantage that companies have or don't have when they acknowledge that they may have been attacked, right? And so that's number one. It disincentivizes that outreach to the government. But the problem is if you don't do that, then you're potentially not only enabling us to come in and help, but you're also potentially not being able to share that information with other people or even to prevent the next one from happening to yourself. I will say that in certain instances that we're talking about here is that when a victim company does contact us, we take that very seriously. If we have no obligation, if you will, to tell the world if a victim company says, hey, I really don't want the world to know about this, I want to work through it to make sure I understand what we have, what we see, then let's talk about that. Bring us in so we can look at it together and see if there's actually something to it.
Yeah, and I'll come back to that in a minute. I want to ask you about, the current administration. Trump pushed through a national cyber strategy, right? And he put that out there. He signed a bill to train local law enforcement in kind of cyber security tactics, I guess is the best, broadest way to put it. Do you feel like we're doing enough from a U.S. governmental standpoint? And that could be the executive branch, the legislative, however you'd like to break it down.
No, I mean, I think we can always, the short answer is no. I think we could always do better at this. I mean, this is the future. I mean, you think about our dependence on technology today. I view this as, this is a wholesale change in the way that we function as a government, as a people, as a society. And now the proliferation of technology has meant that we need people who understand it, who really can get into the zeros and ones, but we also need people who understand policy. We need people who understand how to conduct an investigation. We need those people too. Bring those together so they can complement each other. And I think that's where we tend to fall short, is figuring out how those things can work in symphony and bring in and encourage that type of collaboration and coordination. Now, we're doing a lot in that area, but we could do more.
So we need collaboration, we need more people, it sounds like. Do we need more money? Do we need more laws? What else do we need?
I do think that certainly, as I always like to say, technology is expensive. And so, and the people who understand the technology, we are in, of course, extreme demand across the board. The government will never be able to compete with the private sector when it comes to salary. What we hope we can compete based on is the mission. You're never going to be able to do some of the things that you get to do in the government that you would do in the private sector. And we need each other, though, to share information. I think, personally, if I had ideal space here, I would like to see an ability to move back and forth between private sector and government more easily. And I think that would, I think, further develop all of our understanding and our capabilities across the board.
Yeah. So let's bring this down. What should we be afraid of? Quite literally.
Well, first, of course, I think the number one thing is we continue to see in the FBI the lowest common denominator of where the attacks come from, right? And that would be the human. So
it's our fault.
It's the user error. And what we typically see is you don't update the systems. We don't get the patches because it's inconvenient. Comes at an inconvenient time, and we put it off. But the clicking. The perpetual clicking of things that you don't know where they lead to.
Stop using computers.
It's amazing to me. We have the Internet Crime Complaints Center. We call it IC3. And since its existence, it has taken in about 350,000 complaints. And the vast majority of those are for, of course, non-payment, non-delivery, but also extortion. And for the data breaches. And then when we ask and we peel that away is that, well, how did this happen? Inevitably, much of the time, it comes down to, well, I thought this link was from a person I trusted or from someone that I thought was a legitimate sender. And that's what led us to where we are today.
What share of your work would you say is these, are these very large, you're concerned about nation states and really high-level stuff versus this kind of pedestrian stuff that we hear from our local IT guy?
That's a great question. So we're obviously concerned about both.
Yes.
Because when it comes to nation states, you got some very sophisticated people out there, sophisticated governments. We talked about China and Russia, and we have formally charged them, actual agents of their government, with doing things. The APT-10 indictments back last December.
And this is the Chinese hacker incident from last year.
That's right, yes, and the managed service providers. We saw, of course, in addition to the GRU, the Russians with the election piece, you also saw the anti-doping case where they were able to hack into the agents of the Russian government hacking into the anti-doping organizations. And then we see the same from Iran and from North Korea, but others. I mean, we need to be concerned about nation states because of the capabilities that they may bring to bear. And then, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, the criminals. The people who are just doing it to line their profits are getting pretty good at this. And so when you look at how much money goes through the criminal ecosystem, I'll call it, is pretty phenomenal. We look at the statistics that we try to do, like basically recover assets in the financial fraud kill chain. We call it the recovery asset team. And what they saw is in just the course of a little over a year, about a year and maybe 3-4 months, is they were able to recover $380 million, and that represents about 78% of what was called in. But you think about that, these are people, these are individuals, that's probably their life, people's life savings. And so the criminals are getting really good at figuring out how to con you out of your money, and also how to deliver the malware. It's a whole ecosystem. One person does malware, and one person does the delivery system, and another person does the bulletproof hosting, and another person does, and they all work together in concert to be able to attack you and take what belongs to you. I'm
going to sleep so well tonight. All right, let's go to the audience for questions. We've got one right up here, if we can get them. And please remember to tell us your name and who you're with. Once you get that mic, thank you very much.
Hi, Joel Myers from AccuWeather. What's your greatest fear looking ahead over the next 10 years, even if it's a low percentage probability? In other words, is there a possibility that AI could cause a red flag nuclear missile attack? I mean, what is your greatest fear?
I'd say my greatest fear would be with respect to our critical infrastructure. So our critical infrastructure, I mean, you don't have to go too many steps out to think about the consequences of somebody taking out even a small portion of the United States critical infrastructure, whether it's telecommunications or finance or energy or transportation. Those are some pretty dire consequences, and that's probably the number one thing that keeps me up at night. The second thing I'd say is what you alluded to, though, is the proliferation of technology has led to some amazing things: autonomous vehicles, the Internet of Things, interconnected devices, and the rush to get something to market means that sometimes security is an afterthought, and that's concerning because now we're trying to patch things that are already out there and potentially vulnerable, and usually are.
Yeah. All right, right back here. Yes, please.
Hi, David Patterson with Checker. We've read a lot in the headlines recently about the president's somewhat unique relationship with the FBI. Just out of curiosity, you as a leader and thinking about guiding the organization, how do you remain fiercely independent and remain above the political fray?
Yeah, I think that certainly our director has talked a lot about this as well, but that's exactly what you just said. I think the FBI's job is to collect the facts, to do it independently, to do it apolitically, to do it essentially to the best of our ability to identify and uncover the facts. And no matter where they lead or who likes them, at the end of the day, we present the facts, and this is what we do. And I think for us as an organization, and particularly for leaders in my organization, it's important to keep our folks focused on the mission. We get criticism across the board, we have for 110 years. But it's important that we focus on what we're doing and that we're doing it the right way.
Right up here, please. Yes.
Yeah, Michael Miller, PC Magazine. There's been a lot of controversy about ransomware attacks at cities and other things, whether people should pay the ransom or not. What is your best recommendation?
I will always say that it's not a good idea to pay the ransom because it just further encourages, and we've seen it, the encouragement that gives to others to see, oh, that's a profitable business. And what we've seen is really a transition over time in the way that ransomware is deployed, is that rather than going after the obvious targets of the large companies, the ones who have the big money who could probably pay out, now you see a transition to focus on smaller companies, smaller businesses, the ones that potentially don't have good security and that potentially are more susceptible to compromise. And that's concerning because they'll ask for a lower dollar amount, but in the end, getting a lot more bang for the buck and a lot bigger return on investment. And so obviously what we would like people to do and companies to do is develop their security, develop their, have your backups, get your systems in place, get those systems updated so that you won't fall prey to this. Or if you do, and you probably will at some point, then you have a place to go. You don't have to pay that ransom. You're not beholden to them. Because the last thing I'll add on that is that there is never a guarantee that if you do pay the ransom, that you're going to get your data back. And that's a scary proposition. And
I would specifically ask about municipalities and what's going on with them.
Specific to municipalities.
Okay, yeah, about municipalities, yeah. And of course, we've seen a lot of that lately. And so one of the things that we continue to focus on in our partnership with state and local governments and with the private sector and with the contractors that are out there that are providing those services is trying to think ahead, is that everybody, I guess the best message I could send out there is you're going to be a target. Think of yourself that way. So whether you're a municipality or a small business or whatever, an entity of any sort, you're going to be a target. And so what are you doing right now today to develop the practices, the protocols, the systems, the security in place? Because again, we're going to say don't pay the ransom. You're just encouraging that behavior. And you've seen what happens over time in the sense of you pay the ransom, now somebody else gets hit, or you get hit later. I know it turns out to cost a lot of money for folks to reconstruct their data and to reconstruct their systems, but that's why we need to be thinking about that in advance.
Right. All right, right back there. Yes, please.
Hey, Robert Hackett of Fortune here. So there's a bill floating around Congress that would enable companies to take more active measures after they experience a cyber attack. People call it the hackback bill. What are your thoughts on that piece of legislation?
Should you hack back?
Yeah, I have real concerns about private industry taking offensive actions. I think that could lead to some very dangerous places. It could lead to some dangerous places, for our government. And we are thinking through what are the consequences of government offensive actions. And you think about the collateral damage it could incur, you think about all of the consequences, you think about the potential for retaliation. There's a lot of things that need to be factored in before somebody starts taking offensive actions, because what you might think is a simple hackback, it has a lot of tertiary and secondary consequences that you may not even be aware of, and could potentially be exponentially more damaging to not only you as the company, but others, and to our critical infrastructure as well.
Amy, I've got one more for you. So yesterday we spent a great deal of time at our town hall talking about, how do we regulate technology companies? And there's a lot of back and forth between the public and private sector, and what do we do about it? And does the FBI have too much power? Not enough? How do you see that? Because there's been a great deal of criticism about that.
Yeah, I believe basically in the way that we do business is our system of government was set up in such a way that I think the check and balance is important. The criticism is important, quite frankly, is that it keeps us in check, because I think the regulations are important. The ability, though, to progress as a nation, though, depends on how well our legislation keeps up with the changes in our society and the changes in technology. The FBI is seriously not the only agency that is out there in this business, even though sometimes it seems like we are in the news. But I think that interagency piece is really important, because the way we interact with DHS and DOD and the private sector and academia and state and local governments is hugely important, because each one of those brings a different perspective in and is critically important to the way to ensure that not one particular government entity or any entity has too much power.
Got it. Well, please, a round of applause for Amy. Amy, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.